Today we are going old school with Ral Partha's Fearless Frost Dragon, and this is a miniature I've had for decades probably, and I've had a paint scheme in mind for it just about as long as that, and we're gonna finally try to put it onto the model. What I wanted was a full color spectrum dragon. Rather than being based on just a single color, I wanted to try to include all colors onto one dragon. So rather than just a blue dragon or a red dragon, we got everything. That's the idea I had in mind. However, I didn't have much plan on how to do that. So this is a scheme I've worked on off and on for about 2 months, and this is going to be a bit more documentary than tutorial because I went back and forth, I changed things, I improved things here and there, and since I didn't go into it with a complete plan, I knew what I wanted, but I didn't know about how to achieve it. I did make alterations as well, so you get to follow me along that journey. Started off with our medium blue base coat, and I know I wanted to alternate to a green as we got to the tops of the scales, because we're going to follow our standard color spectrum Roy G Biv here. So we did the B, got to do the G. Starting off with our park green flat, and then we're going to mix in more and more Escorpina green as we get towards the top of the scales, but also as we get further along the neck and the tail. When we get to those thinner areas, the green takes over and becomes the more prominent color for those two spots. On the larger scales where we have more surface area, I decided to add some violet there. So that's going to deepen our blue color, also add a little bit of red to our color spectrum here. And it's mainly on the larger plates, as I said, and that color is going to fade out and as the green takes over as we reach the thinner portions of the neck and the tail. I needed the bottom of the scales to really stand out, and for that I'm using blue-green, and it is a very good framing device for the violet. Essentially, I'm wrapping the violet up with the two colors that are already used on other areas of the model. Figured with some of the larger plates I could expand our palette of colors here by mixing in magenta, which has a bit more red in it than our violet. And just because I want to use all colors on this project doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to use a bright red, a bright yellow, a bright green. I just want touches of every color on this miniature, and just adding little touches here is enough. Onto the skin portion, and this is where the whole paint scheme really started to form in my mind. Initially this was going to be a brown, kind of a leather brown, but I realized that was really drowning out all the other colors that we used on the dragon and will use. Tried some warm gray, which you can still see some remnants here, and just a little bit at the end. But eventually, actually, I decided to use steel gray, and this is where I realized blue was becoming our prominent color in the project, which is fine because obviously one color is going to have to be dominant in this project, but we can still work in all of our other colors as we move on. Towards the upper area of the legs, I decided to work in some blue-violet because that's going to tie it in to the color we used on the bottom of the scales along the back. So we've kind of transitioned. We go from green to blue to purple and then back down to blue as we get to the bottom. However, it's a different shade of blue. It's the steel blue as opposed to the medium blue. So we're in the same ballpark, but not the exact same thing. And then to finish off the skin areas, some red-violet, sort of glazed, sort of washed in, not the recesses, but the base area of where the skin and the scales meet. So that's, once again, adding a little bit more red to our paint scheme. So red is definitely becoming our minor color on this dragon, which is totally fine. Circles or holes is definitely a theme on this dragon, and he's got a whole bunch on the back that we have to do something with. Initially, I started painting those as you normally would, painting them with a shade. I put a very dark, I think it was black or dark blue wash in there. However, it really darkened everything, and I wanted a bright, colorful dragon, so instead used Andrea Blue, just a quick drop in those holes, and you can see it adds a real good amount of brightness and intensity to our dragon. To make all our hard work stand out, using a very heavy wash of Stormy Blue in between the scales and also a little bit in some of the wrinkles or cuts on the scales, and you can really see them pop once we put that wash in place. Pretty much satisfied finally with how the scales along the main body came out. The only thing left to do was a little cleanup work. Started to move on to the wings, which I'll get to in a moment, but also just added a little bit more of our original medium blue into the scales, just to smooth out the transition on some of them, because with the green and the violet we lost a little bit of our blue, so a few very thin glazes will help to smooth things out and still keep our major blue color in play. Finally onto the wings, and this was the biggest pain in the butt on the project. Just could not decide what to do with them, and I repainted them so many times I literally lost count. Finally decided to keep it really simple and just go with lines. Essentially, we're going to add some texture to our wings, and not just once. This is kind of done fairly haphazardly and quick, but because I'm going to be going over it several times, we're going to build up upon layer. This is kind of like stippling, but with lines. And also, this helps to tie it in more with the dragon, because if you notice all that wrinkle skin on the neck and the underbody, well, we're kind of recreating that on the wings. As you can see here, by the time we get to I think this is the fourth or the fifth layer, the pattern is starting to look much cleaner now. What was quick flicks with the brush, once we start building those up, it really starts to come together, and we're going to end up with a fairly subtle pattern, which is kind of what I wanted here. I didn't want anything too prominent because I thought if we did something too ostentatious, it would take away from the rest of the colors that we have on the dragon. For the fingers, we are using royal purple to paint those areas in. Remember that we used purple on the bottom of the scales, technically violet, but we added some red to it. So because we used that on the bottom of the scales, I wanted that on the bottom of the wings as well. Decided to run a straight line down the center of the membranes. The wings are not very prominent on this figure. And then had used some thin royal purple to feather it out just a little bit into the membrane area, so it's not such a stark transition between those two areas. I was hoping to do a different pattern for the top of the wings, but I just couldn't come up with something that would work for what I've created here. I didn't want anything that looks too evil or horrific or even circular. I thought about doing dots, but there's already all these dots on the figure and there's holes in the wings. I thought that'd be too much. So ended up doing pretty much the exact same thing I did on the bottom of the wings. However, it's a little bit cleaner here because, well, I had the underside to practice on. Using turquoise to paint in the fingers, obviously a blue-green color, and hopefully from this shot you can see the methods of my madness here. We used green on the top of the scales, which changed into a blue color, and now we have the exact same thing happening on the wings. Wow, it's almost like I planned it that way. I didn't, but it seemed to work out pretty well. To help tie the wings into the rest of the body, decided to add some dots because we have those running down the sides of the dragon already. And initially, I think I did them in Andrea Blue. I can't remember exactly what color I used, but because of the pattern and the colors we used on the wings, it just was not visible. So I went back and redid them with dark blue. Left some of those lighter blue ones visible, but definitely used a lot more of the dark blue color, so you can actually see them from more than 6 inches away. Also with the dark blue, I decided to add a little bit of a glaze to the base of the skin areas, mainly around the legs. And yes, this is the same area where we initially painted the red violet. So the red shade has definitely not quite disappeared from this project, but it is what's further than the back seat. It's in the trunk, let's say that. The horns were the easiest area to figure out what color they should be, because we've worked our way through the color spectrum. We went through blue, we went through green, we went to the end of green, so of course from there we have to move on to yellow. And here is our finished Fearless Frost Dragon. Had to say that really slow. Yeah, we're done. Didn't cover everything, but like I said, this was kind of an odd, very big project that was spread out over the course of 2 months, and I kept fixing things and changing things, and it was a bit of a mess. At least it's done. So yes, we got pretty much every color on the dragon. We minimized the red quite a bit. I did add a little bit more red-violet by adding a few spots going down the legs. Not too sure if I like that or not, but definitely adding a spot theme towards the end I think really helped to tie the different areas together. One thing you may have noticed is that we did almost no highlighting on this project. It was all color transition, so we ignored pretty much overhead lighting, and rather than going from, say, blue to light blue, we went from blue to green. Hopefully this gave you some ideas of how you can use color on your projects. Highlighting and shading is important, definitely, but sometimes you can just do color transitions and come up with some really interesting effects. And also, hopefully it shows you don't have to be limited to just one color on one area. You can make just one area multiple colors and come up with something pretty cool. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Watch out for snakes!